Australian business leaders and founders have always looked outwards to grow and scale and capture new markets. Of those markets, USA and UK are the most popular routes. As India cements its position as one of the world's most dynamic economies, Australian companies are looking east with eyes on India. India presents a huge opportunity for Australian founders as a first big step for a global play. But navigating India's vast and seemingly complex market requires more than just ambition. It demands local insights, strategic partnerships, and a deep understanding of the cultural nuances. India today stands as one of the fastest growing economies in the world, set to double by 2030. But it's not just about the numbers, it's the potential. With over 700 million internet users and an increasingly tech-savvy middle class, India is a young country with an average age of under 28. And India will have the youngest average age on the planet all the way up to 2070. It is in India now where global innovations are tested, are being adapted and scaled. This means opportunities in sectors from technology, clean energy, semiconductors, education, well, the list goes on. To give a bit of a background about myself, I'm Jasmine Batra, the Managing Director and co-founder of Arrow Digital, a growth marketing agency started back in 2007, headquartered in Melbourne, working with clients all across Australia, from family-owned local businesses, ASX-listed companies, to global tech giants, helping them with their digital strategy, product market fitment, paid advertising, really helping them grow and scale. For the last few years, I have been working on a program called the Big LEAP, which is an Oz industry-backed accelerator to help startups navigate and validate the Indian market, helping them understand the regulatory framework and connect with local ecosystems in India to build lasting partnerships and close deals. Australia and India's economic ties have never been stronger. With the signing of the Economic Cooperation Trade Agreement, and this increased government cooperation at all levels, the country has paved way to welcome Australian founders and businesses. And it is my great pleasure to have the fortune to welcome a stellar panel. And while I don't have the floral welcome shower, please join me in welcoming my guests. My first guest is an experienced C-suite executive, board director, and investor with a proven track record of scaling e-commerce and fintech ventures across the US, Australia, and India. He is the non-executive director of Findi, an ASX-listed company with all its operations out of India. Please welcome Jason Titman. Dynamic, innovative, and people-focused. My next guest comes into the startup land after a stellar corporate career, having worked in senior leadership roles in Telstra, NAB, British Airways, leading digital transformation. Her passion is maximizing human potential. She has been through my Big LEAP program. Please welcome Renata Sguario, the founder and CEO of Maxme. A politician, diplomat, and forward-thinking visionary. My final guest joining to grace the stage is the former Premier of New South Wales and former Australian High Commissioner to India. He has been a driving force in the negotiations of the Australia-India Economic Trade Agreement and has played an immense role in strengthening Australia-India relations. Please put your hands together to welcome the Honorable Barry O'Farrell. I will start with you, Barry. During your time as the High Commissioner to India, you had a close view of the regulatory shifts in India, the landscape. What sectors do you see as having the greatest potential for Australian businesses to thrive in India?
The good news is that you have, and the ECTA, the comprehensive, the initial trade deal, was a sweetener, if you like. A sweetener, if you like, agreed by the national Indian government in recognition of the fact that we have complementary economies. We have things that they need to grow their economy, and of course we're always looking for markets. So we're really lucky that we don't compete much with India absent a bit of sugar cane, and they're terrified of our dairy industry. We have the world's most efficient dairy industry in Australia. India has the world's largest, and we never say this, but probably the least efficient in India. And even though the Department of Agriculture told me before I left to go to India that if all the rain fell in the right spots at the right time, Australia's crops could feed 45 million people, which, as we know, is just under half of, over double of what we've got. Despite that, every time I put that point to the Indian Trade Minister, whether it was about wheat, cotton, milk, they just somehow or other believe that we would swamp their system. So the good news is that one of the ways in which the former and the current Australian trade ministers have got things past the Indian government is that our farmers are now working with Indian farmers to improve efficiency. So it's the old mutual benefit approach. Wine growers in Maharashtra, there are wine growers in Maharashtra. Some of them have been educated in Australia. They're keen on replicating Australia's wine tourism, where you go, have a drink or have the tastings, have a lunch, and sometimes stay there, because that's growing enterprise in India. So that may well be the thing that helps access Australian wine to that 200, 300 million middle class in India.
Thank you. I'll come to you, Jason. You have scaled ventures in Australia, in the US. Talking about India, how different or how challenging, or what are some of the observations you've made when it comes to starting and scaling in India?
It's definitely an interesting question, considering the size of the population of Australia versus the population in India. And I think a lot of people, when they leave their own country to another country, fall into the fallacy that what works here is can work there. So I guess that's a foregone conclusion not to fall into that trap. One of the things as well with India is definitely each of the states are different though. We shouldn't look at it just as a country. Each of the states are different. One of the things that we do in the financial services space as we transition people from the cash economy to the digital economy is we're focusing on tier 3 and tier 4 cities. So we're still addressing a population of about 500 to 600 million people. So we're not looking at India as a whole 1.4 billion. At the moment, we're looking at really honing in on that. So that's something that we're doing. I guess also understanding the technology aspect of it as well, and the human element. Because labour is relatively cheap and a lot of people in India consider it quite cheap, there's still a tendency over there to kind of throw people at problems. But as Jasmine identified earlier, with 190 odd unicorns already and the idea to go to 230 plus, and they're well on the way to get a lot more unicorns. India's got some of the smartest people and some of the best tech that companies around the world are using. But the actual systems and processes within a lot of the Indian companies are quite the same. So we've certainly had to kind of take it from, my experience of what we've done in Australia, what I've seen in the US, what I've seen work in Europe, and try and bring some of that thinking into India, that it's not just about people throwing people at problems. So a few insights there.
And talking about people, you have in your corporate role worked with Indian counterparts, and we know that there's the energy, the youth. What are some of the things that you have seen in terms of the young people, in India, and both in terms of their training, skills development, and how you would compare to the Australian workforce?
Thanks, Jazz. So I would say this in front of my own children. What I love about the youth in India is they're disciplined and they work very hard. I think they need to learn to, focus on something. They're hungry for skills. Tell them what they need and they're onto it. My children, not so much. So I think India has got a hunger for progress. The people in India can see what is ahead of them. They can feel the growth. They can feel the momentum. They can feel the potential. And they want to be a part of that. Why not? Why shouldn't they? They want to be part. I read some stat, I don't know if it was from a year or whatever, by 2047, 25% of the workforce will be Indian. Oh. 25%. That is incredible, and so it should be. I worked in and around Indian companies my whole career, basically. I'm a technologist. I had teams in India. I loved working with them. I loved the loyalty that they showed me. I loved the family sense of, we can do this together. Just tell us what to do. Just work with us and we'll be yours. And so I love the possibility. It's very energizing how I buy.
And young people have another purpose, which is that one of the great things about living in India is airline travel's cheap. Melbourne, Sydney fare about $50. So travelled a lot, got lost a lot, and would ask the youngest person around where I should be going because they all start learning English in primary school. They may lose it sometimes later on, but when they're 8, 9, 10, geez, they're pretty good at it, in directing it to where you're going.
That's such a good point as well. Like many in the world over, it's not so well known that, yes, India has all these different languages, but English is almost a second language. And some of the states, that's how all their education system is. I mean, I grew up in Lucknow. We were taught I went to Loreto in Lucknow, and we were taught by Irish nuns. So it was very, very different. So when I came to Australia, people would say, so did you always live here? I said, how come your English is so good? So it is there. So it's understanding some of those elements as well. I mean, Jason, you've worked with VCs and investors in different markets, and for founders, raising capital is always one of the big things. How do we get investors to invest in companies which are scaling? And of course, like in India, they would want to invest in somebody who's got a domicile in India. Australian companies have their own rules around who they would invest in. What are some of the guidelines that you would have for founders who are looking to scale and how they should fund some of that expansion?
I think too many founders think that it's a badge of honour to raise capital. So I think if you don't need to raise it, there's nothing wrong with that. At the same time, though, you've also got to understand is that you might have something, 100% of something this size, or say 10% of something this big. If you start looking at like that as well from a founder's perspective, so I think founders can fall into two camps. One is that successful founders need a lot of drive, you need to control things a lot. But you've got to work out when to step back from that level of control. So I do find that founders, I would say, fit into two camps. One is that they are reluctant and they don't raise and they should, but they hang on and that actually crimps their growth because what we see with a lot of technology companies now, a lot of businesses, you've got to get big quick. Doesn't mean you have to be running massive losses, but it is about playing share. It is market share. It is about expanding. So some don't raise when they should, but at the same time, I see many that should actually focus on the problem they've got. Get the product market fit right first. Get the pricing right and start getting revenue coming in at the top of the funnel. That will solve your funding problems. And I think there's too many founders that jump straight out and think that they've got to raise capital for something when they haven't got the product market fit right, and they haven't got pricing, they haven't got their customer, their sale, their go-to-market strategies right. So I think there's probably some of the things I would get to. Look, investors are definitely getting a lot more astute, and I think what I also see with founders is trying to understand the right level that you're pitching at. If you haven't got any profit at the moment, there's no point pitching to private equity. and I still hear founders talk about, I'm going to go talk to VCs and private equity, wasting your time talking to private equity and environment. In fact, if you haven't got your metrics right in terms of the amount that you're actually growing your company, if you're not looking at the rules of 40, some of these sorts of metrics that VCs are looking at, then you probably shouldn't be looking to VCs. You might actually be better to looking to family offices, high net worth individuals, family and friends. So you've got to have a look. And some startups jump straight past those into VCs. But what I would say is it's a matter of understanding it. The last point I'll finish on is that for VCs, private equity, or even family investment offices, but less so, their job is to find the next unicorn. So they're going to be really happy to have conversations with you as a founder. The problem with that is there's only one of you or two of you usually, and you just spend a pocket load of time running around talking to investors that are nowhere near going to invest in your company for the next 2, 3 or 4 years. So you've got to work out that balance about, pretty meat dipping and king kind of thing, getting in front of them and having some level of awareness, but don't over-invest. I see founders that are struggling to get their companies off the ground. Instead of spending 80 hours a week, they should be investing into the company, just building and getting all those things right. They're spending 60% of their time, or 60 hours of their week, running around talking to investors. And I think they've got the mix wrong. So, points that I would suggest people look at.
And Ren, you have, as somebody who has been raised capital here successfully and is raising, especially as a female-led founder, which we know the stats don't stack up well, how have you found personally the your conversations you've had with investors in India and the parallels that you have seen?
So India is a lot more open to female founders, which is exciting. But one of the things that we learned in our first 6 months, we launched in India, but we went in a JV. And what became very obvious to us is that Indian companies are looking for stayers. They don't want a flash in the pan. So if you don't show you're in India for the long term and you're willing to invest, put the time in, etc., you're not going to get, certainly with corporates where we play, but also schools, they want to know that you're there. And so we've got our own India company. We've launched a company in India because the other thing that I was told was that it would be very, very difficult for Indian investors to invest in an Australian company. There are all sorts of rules and laws around that, fair enough. Just like here, it's really hard to get something past the third, right? We all know that. So I think it makes a lot of sense for us. We're in India for the long term. We want Indian investment. We want advisory coming out of India. We're there. So why wouldn't we? And so I will say it's been a little bit painful setting up the company in India. I mean, fair enough, right? But you have to do all of the checks. They've got to make sure that you're not a dodgy person, right? Trying to set up in India. So it's been a little bit of time, about 3 months, but we're really excited about what this is going to mean for us longer term.
And having those conversations which are moving. So from a diplomatic perspective, Barry, what do you think, how the international investors can support founders who are scaling internationally, and also businesses, government, how does the funding, do you see any opportunities there for supporting scaling internationally?
Well, there's no shortage of research funding in Australia, and that was, let's be again. No shortage of research funding in Australia. That was made clear to me every year. There'd be announcements made and successful applications approved. But what I was going to say, Jasmine, is that the Australian government, under the last 2 governments, has been very focused on the investment side and is working hard the Indian system to ensure that there's an investment schedule beside sitting alongside the next trade deal, because there is this concern about what happens if it goes wrong. We don't like to think about things going wrong in anything, but what happens if it goes wrong? And we've had companies in the past, I don't believe in living by past examples, who have spent 12 years getting an issue resolved in the courts in India. So there's pressure by the Australian government as part of the current trade negotiations to get an investment schedule which may perhaps deliver a Singapore-style approach to, if there is a problem, it's quickly resolved and people move on.
I just sort of internally, I think it's really important that respect is paid to the fact that it's a huge economy and it's a huge system, and we've got to really take the time to understand it. Like this whole, the Westerners coming in, like reality, that's ridiculous. You're just so far advanced compared to us on so many things. Like I couldn't believe that, and I only heard that on 6 trips over there. At the end of the day, we have to pay respect to the fact that it's a big system, a big economy over there. To the point that you made, it is also quite bureaucratic, not just for Australians, also for Indian companies as well. So you just got to be aware of all that.
Yeah, and talking about the R&D grants, I know some of you founders might have applied for the R&D grant, accessing commercialization grants. The challenge I know some of us have, I had a founder who was approved for the accessing commercialization grant, and then the program was discontinued. So there's a lot of those things that happen. There is an EMDG grant available at the moment, which is Export Market Development Grant, if you're looking to test those international markets. But it's always that the process and the commitment. And what I find sometimes when founders would sort of look at, let me take my product and take it to India. And Jason, I'm sure you have seen this, how important it is to get things from the ground up. You can't just, the adaptation of the product to India. And sometimes just getting those ideas from them on the ground. Could you talk to us about, how you have that experience of, you have over 59,000 locations you have presence. You're spread across all the 33 states of India.
Our business is, one part of it is relatively simple. We have a lot of ATMs throughout India, and then we have a digital payment Findi Pay app, which is an integrated app for payments, e-commerce transactions, so buying things off the cart, buying things off Amazon, train tickets, etc. That's largely what we do. We don't sort of see those integrated apps over here in Australia so much, but in India they are quite popular. So in terms of what we have sort of seen and what was interesting is, and I mentioned that we are focusing on the Tier 3 and the Tier 4 cities. So we are not focusing on the young Saudi Indians in Mumbai, Bangalore or Delhi so much. But this app is actually with the Kirana stores, so it's actually managed by the local shopkeepers essentially. But what we're doing is we're transitioning the Indian population from the cash economy to the digital economy. One of the big problems in India is the low taxation base. So the government have forced people to have bank accounts. I think they've opened over 580 million bank accounts in the last couple of years. But a lot of Indians still don't trust the banking system or the government. So they go to an ATM, pull the cash out. But 80% of the digital transactions in India, particularly rural and semi-rural India, are paid for in cash in the last mile. So it's a very different situation. Whenever we're buying something online here or in the US, you're slipping in a credit card or you're using some payment method. That doesn't happen in lots of parts of India where we're transacting. So it's a very different mindset, and applying not only the technology, the processes of selling or the processes of the customer experience has to be modified very differently for the market. So, that's an example. That is changing, but it's certainly the process of the journey at the moment.
Yeah, adaptation is so important. That was going to be my question to you, Ren. You have clients here as Deloitte, Accenture, but just taking that product the way it is to India wouldn't have worked. So can you tell us how you have adapted your solution and the market that your customer segment that you're targeting in India?
I think for us, we've got two main products that we're selling into India. This is our schools product. So our school panel, most importantly, work experience or internship reimagined. Because there's a real drive to want to get work experience and the skills to work. So that's our first product. And then our corporate product, definitely back into corporates. I'll start with schools. And so the program's been run here. Every child has a laptop. So you go into the room, you're absolutely able to run our 3-day program, project-based, really hands-on. very exciting, modern learning, and they can do, because we've got a TED platform, so they can do stuff in the classroom, outside the classroom, using the laptop. It's just very different in India. They didn't have, kids have phones, but they don't have them at school. They're in a classroom that, they've got the touch screen and the sort of smart whiteboards, and that's kind of it. They've got computer labs, but they're somewhere else. And so we're adapting our product to make sure, again, back to the kids who are willing to do homework or out-of-class work, we're reimagining our own program to say, what can we allocate for the kids to do coming into our workshops? So what can we do in a classroom? We're going to use handbooks. It's the only way we're going to be able to do it. But how do we then grab the information that they're putting into the workbook and load it into the tech? We can do that. AI, it's actually not hard. So we're adapting that, and the Indian school system has nothing like what we do, is really excited about what that's going to mean. So it's a win-win situation. Corporate's a bit different. In India, corporate training is very much off the tools in a classroom for 7 hours. I call it the drinking from the fire hose approach. It's not working, it's not translating. And I think corporates know that in India, but transition them away to what we do, which is sustainable bite-sized learning over a longer period of time, 5 weeks, 7 weeks, 9 weeks. It's not the norm. And so we're having to re-educate, but work with, so it's a hybrid. We'll do some things in workshops, a little bit of Edtech, a little bit of this. So we're really being very realistic about what it's going to take to re-educate, because that's what we want to do.
And during your time as the High Commissioner of India, India-Australia relationship reached a new height. What were some of the cultural drivers that diplomatic cultural drivers that would have led to bringing that closeness of ties?
I think these days, you can go through cricket and all the rest of it, but these days it's the growth in the Indian diaspora in Australia. I do a little bit of work with Sydney University. We weren't sure how quickly overseas students from around the world would come back to Australia post-COVID, let alone India. And as we've seen, they've bounced back enormously. I put that down to the fact that we now have almost 1 million people of Indian origin living amongst us. They have children who are going to university too, and they've become the greatest proponents of our high quality, low cost compared to Europe and US, and closer proximity to university in Australia. So I think that's been part of it. But people matter. I'm about to upset half of you, but let me finish the sentence. Every Prime Minister since Federation's tried with India and then moved on. Morrison is the first person to give it a full 3-year effort, and the better news is that Albanese is just as keen to do the same thing. So you finally, for a country that's always traded with the world, we've just been a bit chary about India, and that's now ended. And I think it's ended in part because of the fact that Modi is determined to modernise India, forget the other stuff, but to modernise India. That's why a 25% increase in national highways in the last 10 years. That's why their infrastructure program is worth $180 trillion. That's why they build the equivalent of Sydney to Perth Road every 9 months in India. And Modi knows that we've got resources, technology, research that can help him deliver that. And his 3 big things are economy. He's a right-of-centre politician, so of course it's about the economy, but more importantly about employment in India. It's about employment, it's about education and English, because he knows that English is the language of the world, and that's why he's doubled down on English education around the country.
Yes, economy, employment, education, and that whole English and all that whole infrastructure from investment perspective. I mean, we know that it presents such a huge growth story, but it takes more than ambition to make it in India. Understanding the cultural nuances, the local insights, the partnerships. And Jason, Findi has established some amazing strategic partnerships with banks. I understand that you do ATMs for banks like Central Bank of India and other big nationalized banks. What have been some of the lessons you have learned in closing some of those enterprise level deals?
Be patient. Look, I think it's fair to say as well, as an Australian company that owns the Indian business, we gave and had some incentives in there so that Indian management now have 20%. We wanted them to be heavily invested in the business themselves. We've worked very closely with we go over there 5 or 6 times a year and are in weekly communication with the key executives and get briefings from all of their teams. So we work very closely with them. In terms of building relationships, it's certainly helpful that India is based a lot off the British legal system, so that helps. But it is very bureaucratic. It is different. It is relationship driven. So I think even though countries like Australia, US and Europe, you do business during business hours, and then you do have dinners and social events afterwards. India is still doing business at the social events. So you might be having your social events or your business meetings up until 10 o'clock later in the evening, but you still talk business all the time. Oftentimes in Australia, you talk business for a while, and people want to talk about sport or want to talk about something else. So I think you have to understand that they do take it very seriously. They have fun at the same time, but they take it very seriously. And you're always on, is what I would say, in India. So relationships are definitely important. Have a level of patience and understand that things do take time. There are a lot of processes that things need to go through, and it's a matter of pushing them through the process. Sometimes you push too hard and it actually goes slower. So I think the reverse can happen. But it's being very clear about the relationships, the outcomes that you want.
Yeah, you're 100% spot on in terms of business never stops. I mean, when we went for the the Big LEAP Immersion program, I had this vision that somehow I wanted people to experience an Indian wedding. We know how grand and it wasn't the Reliance wedding that I could get an invite to.
Thank goodness for that.
But we attended a wedding in India, and it was, most of the people there come from business communities or know somebody who knows somebody, and a lot of deals get done there. So Renata, maybe talking about that whole partnerships and experience of working in that whole Big LEAP program for the immersion and just the meetings overall, what has been your observation about the families, the festivities, and how that combines with finance?
Yeah, I completely concur. And I think it's about a respect for that as well. Like I'm not doing this. This is not the way I operate. Actually, I operate the way India operates because I'm in India. So first of all, can't believe you pulled off that wedding. I've never been to an Indian wedding, and it was unbelievable. Like everything I expected and more. Thank you, Jasmine. The other thing I'd like to say is you can't do it alone in India. So the Big LEAP program, and you allowed me to come on too. So Jasmine allowed me to sort of piece back off the first phase, which in Delhi, I was in Delhi at the same time, and Jasmine, we come to some of the things that were on, and then I was lucky to be part of phase 2, and you opened a lot of doors for us. And I sort of look back on that, it was, a year ago, let's say, a lot of things would not have been possible without those connections, because it is all about relationships. It is all about who you know. I don't know how else to say it. It is all about that. And you've got to prove yourself. You've got to do your time. You've got to go to the things. You've got to have the right conversations. You've got to be respectful. All those things. They are 18 months into it. I'm still learning. I still feel like I'm at the start gate because it's such a majestic, incredibly complex, amazing country. But programs like the Big LEAP, partnerships, it's critical to success.
Thank you.
And Jasmine, can I just add that, what you said is exactly right. You need to get there. You're going to see the opportunities for your sector, for your proposal. Even though they work really hard, diplomats and Austrade are not going to deliver you the miracle contract that's going to make you a unicorn. But go and have a look around. And as you're looking around, as Camilla Franks told a wonderful story at some business awards in Canberra, she's been there for 20 years now, doing very well. And neither side thought it would work initially.
Yes.
you meet people who ultimately prove to be successful to the venture.
And hers was such an amazing story of not looking at India as just a provider of a tech or an outsourced factory which is producing garments. It was partnership. It is that whole thing of integrated relationship. India is very big on relationships. I always say contacts become contracts only with the letter R, and that's relationships. It's so critical. And it is about the legacy. It's about what are you bringing in. I mean, recently the chairman of Tata, Ratan Tata, passed away, and his contribution to the Indian economy, the landscape, philanthropy, it's just immense. And what do we bring in, I guess, from that perspective? It would be, did you find as well that importance of, the giving back? Like, of course, the trade deals are important and it has to make commercial sense. But was there any give that you can share with us?
Of course there was. There's always give when you're doing deals with people. And I don't think this is a secret, but it cost Australian government $60 million a year. There was a double taxation agreement affecting IT companies, whether you worked in India, whether you worked in Australia and vice versa. There was no single taxation agreement, and no government wanted to give it up. And it was clearly going to be an easy way to create some goodwill at the centre by saying, all right, fine, we'll sacrifice it. Now, 60 million in terms of the Australian economy is zero, but if it gives us access not just to the first trade deal, but the second trade deal, it'll absolutely be one of the better investments ever made.
I think it's so important. You've got to go in with love in your heart. I know that sounds really cliche and it's soft, but Indian people are so giving. Like, there's a saying that the guest is
like go. That's how
they treat you, and they welcome you into their family and give you everything. But if you're a taker, not a giver, you're not going to survive there. You really got to go with your whole heart open around what are you bringing to India? Why are you there? Because it can't be just to make a buck. Forget it. Yeah. Forget it.
Or if it is about making a buck, as it is for many people in business, let that not be your lead. Now, there's nothing wrong with having an ambition to do well for a whole variety of reasons. But like with most of the relationships in life, you think about this, it is give and take. And as you say, connect yourself.
Yeah, I was going to say, they have in India as well this thing called corporate social responsibility.
Legislative.
Yes, 2%. Certainly will turnover. They've also got things such as the Unified Payments Network, UPI. They're bringing in the ONDC, which is the on-demand e-commerce platform as well. One thing I think that we can often get caught up with is if you're not in India and getting immersed, you get caught up with the various memes on social media. You get caught up with what the TV and general print media have sort of printed about India. The reality of it is a lot of sophistication behind the scenes. The Unified Payments Network in the Fintech space that I operate in, the ONDC for the online demand e-commerce that they're bringing like a centralised platform is something that no other economy really anywhere around the world has. And some of these things are still finding their kind of fit in there, and companies are trying to work out how to work through them. But they are significant. So, just as India is a huge economy, got lots of different segments, it's actually very sophisticated. It's not the chaos that potentially we've thought of in India of the past. It is a sophisticated economy. But there's still lots of opportunities for business and for Australian businesses to amplify what they're doing in that economy or find some new opportunities.
It's fascinating.
Singapore last year adopted UPI.
Yes.
And it's adopted it for a good reason. It makes it easier for Indian tourists to visit a country because they're doing exactly the payments the same way as they do at home.
Yep.
And they also have a system by using fingerprint and biometrics for making payments in India. Arguably a safer system than what we've got here in many respects. So they are very advanced and are bringing that advancement through to lots of people. At the same time, though, we talk about smart mobile phones. There's a lot of them in the big Tier 1, Tier 2 cities, not so many of them yet in the Tier 3, Tier 4 cities, which are transacting still a lot in cash.
but there's internet coverage across the whole country.
which is quite remarkable. And it's fascinating, Jason. You talked about the media and the stories. I mean, the media still has very outdated views about what India has and the story India has to offer. And in fact, when I was promoting my Big LEAP program, I had the message, take your startup to India. We did not get any conversions happening. When we sat down with the marketing team, we changed that to take your startup global. That's when we started to get the applications, and then we weaved in the India story into it. I know that the conversation and all is changing, and but still there is a whole lot that is unaware. I mean, you've been a politician, you've been a diplomat. If you were to be that young, like the entrepreneur again, what would be an enterprise, a startup that you would look to do or build or support?
I wouldn't have gone into politics if I had that skill. But look, so it's been said today, young, bright Indians, Atlassians about to take on another 3,000 people in India. Initially they thought they'd go to 2 destinations. Have now, as we know, thought, why would you restrict yourself to 2 destinations? You can work from home. And you've got these young kids, very young, up to their 30s and others, who are just looking for that next spot. They want to be the next unicorn. And on the unicorns, I don't know a lot about unicorns. I was in politics. But last year, India had more unicorns created than India, double the number.
Yeah, when there was a time during COVID, we had 9 unicorns in that 1 year.
And can I just do a little statistic? India's share of world GDP is currently about 3.3%, which is about where China was in 2014. So there's no doubt that India's trajectory is heading in the right direction.
And I think the other thing that I discovered is that corporates in India want to work with startups. That's not the case in Australia. Corporates in Australia are very wary of startups, and you've got to jump through 15,000 hoops to convince them and still don't convince them. But in India, the ecosystem is so sophisticated where corporates realise they don't have the internal talent. They don't have the R&D spend, or why should they? If there's unicorns or non-unicorns or unicorns or whatever startups that they're doing that, they'll bring them in and they'll actually use their services. It's a very vibrant connection over there. It's really real.
In fact, what I love, when we were in India with my first delegation, we had a meeting with the Ministry of Innovation and Technology in the state of Telangana, which is one of the youngest states. They have a policy which is government as your first client policy for startups, which is unbelievable. So they say they've actually got a whole desk that if you're a startup and if you have a solution which is a big impact and selling to government is harder, let us become the first client, your government contract, and then that will open new doors. And even an organization like the RBI, which is very closed, the monetary policy, they have created RBI, the whole digital fintech innovation hub. So if you are creating something which will impact the economic monetary policy, they want to work with startups. So the government there is eager to see what ideas do you bring to the table. Who wouldn't want that? Would you like to have your first contract as the government of India? We took a startup which has created, it's a health tech startup, a medical device, which is a VR headset for anybody who's had a mental health trauma or injury, head injury. And of course, our target was aged people who've had a cognitive decline due to the, a stroke or age. And for them, physiotherapy means that somebody has to come in every day for them to improve their mental alertness. This VR headset has got bubbles. You punch red bubbles. You pick blue balls from the bucket. We found in one of the conversations, the founder said, "I'll set a meeting with the Indian Military Academy because they would have use for what you have to offer because they would love their soldiers to get back." I mean, that's something which is so unthinkable to get to have governments as your first few contracts. And I think there's a lot that the government is doing. There's a whole lot more that could be done. Do you have any things that you would like to see from both sides of the government, Jason, that you think would really make entrepreneurship flourish to betterment of the human society?
Look, I think it's an interesting one. Certainly the extra agreement was good. It was sort of done 12 months ago or 18 months ago now. It's really started to do a lot. I guess without getting too political about it, that agreement was great. We enabled a whole lot of produce, goods and services to be, sold to India without too much tax on, very favourable. We've probably got to look at the moment what we're doing with immigration, so I won't go too deep into that. But on the one hand, we're constantly going to see all this stuff, and on the other hand, all of a sudden we're saying, I'm not sure how many people we want to allow into this country. I think we have to be realistic about that. That's a social issue that Australia is looking at, but we have to look at our trading partners perceive that. Leaving that aside, beyond that, I think it's the continued education and keeping the narrative at the fore. Just because you do a trade agreement, or just because the Australian Prime Minister goes over and visits the Indian Prime Minister or vice versa, and says, hey, we're great friends and pals, and just because we've got great camaraderie between cricket, doesn't mean that our startup community is going to be vibrant. It doesn't mean that the wider and broader 27 million people in Australia are going to start to embrace India and the opportunities there. So I think it's an ongoing narrative that needs to happen, because I know as a publicly listed company that our stock over the last 4 years that I've been involved with it has gone up over 1,000%. That is on the basis of the quality of the business in India. It was just so undervalued here previously. But there was a lot of pounding of pavements, and a lot of people basically, even well-known investment advisors that I've had experience with in the past, and so have my fellow directors, who will almost shake the door in our face because they said, no, we don't want to touch the sovereign risk of India. It took 3 or 4 no's, and we kept beating down the wall, or their doors, to have meetings with them, and they started hearing it, seeing it, and they started believing it. That's 4 years is a relatively short period of time for the success that we've had to get that repriced. But that's hard work, but that was just us. I think, the narrative needs to be that there's more open-mindedness, and that the government just creates opportunities for conversations, opportunities for discussions. At the end of the day, startups will find their way, investors will find their way, but you've got to kind of give that forum and that basis for it.
And it is a leap of faith, right? I mean, you have to get out of... Barry, you grew up in Melbourne, you did your university...
I grew up in
Darwin. You were born in Melbourne.
Get that in.
Grew up in Darwin.
What do you mean?
Of course, entered state politics in New South Wales, did your degree in ANU. So you've really traveled. And then your first international posting ever was to India. So it does...
First and last international posting.
But to take that brave courage to just go to India, it is about bravery.
Well, actually, besides a desire to pursue the relationship, I'd never lived offshore. So that was the key determinant in doing the whole thing. But look, in India is amazing, and just to go back to the ECTA for a moment, alongside the ECTA, there's a whole range of memorandums of understanding, MOUs, which I used to think when I was Premier were just excuse me for this analogy, it was a very 80s analogy. It was like a first date, nothing was guaranteed. But I've learned as a diplomat that if you want to see what areas your governments are interested in, have a look at the MOUs in place. So we have a space MOU, we have MOUs ranging from space, all these things that potentially, while not providing you with a guarantee, provide you with a place to start. Because MOUs do not allow bureaucrats to ignore those issues. My 2 favourite stories about India is Modi, when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat, introduced the dashboard. Biggest problem in government is you make decisions, but are those decisions implemented in the right places? Modi has this electronic dashboard that's now been replicated in a number of other states, which basically at a glance can tell him where things are up to.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
But his second great policy, which was not sophisticated, was after he won 3 elections as Chief Minister of Gujarat. After each election, he sent the secretaries of the department to villages to live for a week to remind them what public service is about. Now, not a bad idea to replicate in Australia.
Yeah, there is a lot to learn, right? And I know for Australian
Villages in
companies,
Australia. Not over there.
yeah, I mean, for Australian companies, India is a huge market. I mean, it presents a huge market for your products as consumers of your solutions. It's got the highest uptake of different SaaS platforms. For Indian companies, of course, India is a huge partner for technology collaborations, advancements. So what is it that you have to offer which could build a bridge between the two countries, technical collaborations between the two countries? When I talked about corporate innovation, there are a lot of big corporates which want to tie up with other companies who can bring a technology that then makes the combined creation much bigger than the parts of the sum. And really, it is about taking that step, venturing out, and writing your own narrative. You mentioned about some of the sectors, and there are a lot of, I know one of the questions that came up in the LinkedIn when I asked people for what they would like to ask the panel was some key sectors that you think would be high growth. I mean, we know about renewables and sustainability, but are there any other areas that you would recommend for founders to look at for doing more deals with the country?
Not that it's my space of expertise, but I think education, the average age of an Indian is 28. They have a lot of people coming through, and I think they're going to, really need, I think they've acknowledged, I think they need 10 million more teachers or something a year.
Every year.
To continue educating the population. So those sort of numbers are just outstanding. But I think also healthcare. In India has kind of a two-segment of healthcare, not dissimilar to other countries as well. Oftentimes, if you can afford it, you can get a very good high quality. But for the majority of people in India, there isn't high quality healthcare. And I think that's another area where is a huge development.
I think the other thing we need is longevity is being spoken about a lot in India. So people in India are living longer, and also the nuclear families. So, traditionally parents would live with the son and the daughter-in-law, but sometimes the son and daughter-in-law go overseas. So the parents are living on their own, and where are they going to retire and look after them, etc. So that is a really emerging market as well at the moment, which is the whole retirement sector. And living longer and having good health. And, we know that in India there are some sicknesses. There are definitely some sickness. Diabetes is very high.
We love our food.
Well, it's all right. I mean, we all do, definitely. I certainly not when I go to India for that very reason. But, I think so. I think there's all of that emerging, but I agree with education is a big one. And I do goods and services. I'm going through stores in India, in the malls, and they've got all the same stuff that I see in Chadstone Shopping Centre at the same prices. Like you would think, it must be cheap, but not at all. And people are buying. Definitely the growing middle class, they want to get ahead, they want to have nice things like everyone else around the world, and everyone's on TikToks and they can see it, everyone's seeing what's happening. Why wouldn't you want that? Of course you want affluence. So,
Good. So just in closing, your last words of wisdom, advice for those who are probably thinking on the fence whether they should, look at crossing borders.
I think Barry touched on it before. India is where China was probably sort of 10, 15 years ago or more. Massive opportunity. It is a democratic society. And they are a very aspirational nation of people, and I think, and they are a very warm and embracing nation of people. So I think just massive opportunities to kind of follow your area of passion, your area of action, at an open mind. And if you haven't been, or even if you haven't been recently, get over there and spend a couple of weeks just looking around, immersing yourself, and seeing what ideas might come up between either bringing back that here or doing business in India.
Thank you, Jason. Grant.
I think for me, definitely find something like the Big LEAP or somewhere that's going to give you some of the, I agree with you go, but if you can go with something a bit of a leg up, and definitely plan to go more. So there's no way you leave your business in India out of Australia. You really have to commit to the region.
Sure.
Give it a go. Yep.
Give it a go. I love that. That's and it is. I mean, you have done more trips to India, Rin, than I have actually in the last 18 months. So I have a little. If there was one hashtag you have for India, your one-word hashtag for India as a story, message, what would that be? Good. I'll give you a pen. If you could write that, here it is. And while they do that, I want a show of hands. How many of you would consider looking at going to India as your next stop? I know you had a show of hands. How many hands are going on? Some are half, like some of them are. Cool, very good. Look, it's a very exciting place. It's about fun. India's festivity, fun, family, and it's about making money. It's about globalization. Everything. There's a business. I was seeing there was flood somewhere, and there's this little guy who's got a pump. He's pumping water and getting people's car out, and he's just collecting money for doing that. So it's enterprising. Okay, let's have what did you have for your and the land of opportunity?
I got surprising.
Surprising.
It's not what you think it is. That's right.
I love that. What's that?
Incredible's better.
Incredible. Okay, let's have a show of your things. Well, I would love to know what your hashtag story is for India when you get there. And with that, I would like you to join me in giving a massive applause to our amazing